Hey everyone, what's going on? It's the Bearded here, and today we're going to take a look at fixing the fuel system on your Ryobi C430 4-stroke weed. Um, Home Depot sells a $7 kit. This should be all that we need to do. The symptoms we're looking for are you pulled it out to use it, you prime it, doesn't seem like it primes very well, takes too long to get it started or may not start at all. And the chances are it's just the fuel system components themselves. This primer bulb, a couple of fuel lines. You don't have to go buy a new one. So we'll take a look, see what's wrong with this one, and we'll go ahead and fix it up.
So the first thing we want to do is take this cover off that covers the carburetor. Also shows the instructions on how to start it. Now it's going to get a little messy, so if you have some gloves, I'd go ahead and put them on. Now we're going to unscrew these two Phillips screws which hold down this metal ring that keeps the primer bulb on top of the carburetor. As I said, gas will pour out of there, so just be careful that you're not leaking it onto something that would be damaged. I always keep a metal magnetic pan like you see in the bottom left there that allows me to set screws, nuts, and bolts in so that they don't get lost. Take a look at the difference between those two primer bulb colors and you'll see why one of them might be bad. Now we get into a little bit of a close-up where we're replacing that primer bulb with a new one, sliding that metal ring back on, putting the two Phillips screws back in, and getting ready for the next step, which is the actual fuel lines themselves. You want to make sure you tighten these screws as good as you can. Don't strip them out, but they need to be fairly tight because that will leak fuel and can cause issues running even with the new primer bulb. The next step we're going to go through is removing the gas tank. Although it's not required, it makes the job a heck of a lot easier by allowing you to fish those lines. To do this, we use a T25 Torx bit, and I'm showing two screws are being removed. I suspect there was a third one, but I'm not the original owner of this weed eater, and so it looks like there's a spot for probably a third that was already missing. I also prefer to remove the gas tank because I like to clean it out a little bit with some carburetor cleaner. In between a lot of these steps, I am spraying everything down with carb cleaner just to make sure that it's clean and check for any other leaks or any other issues that might come up later on. Once the screws are removed, we just pop off those fuel lines. I popped one off earlier and just pulled the second one off here again. Also keep note that there's these little metal spacers below the gas tank where the screws went through. Try not to lose them. I do drop one and have to find it a little bit later on. First I pull out the return fuel line. That's the one in the back for this model weed eater. And then I insert that fishing line through the gas tank and out the opening so that we can attach our new piece of return line onto the end of it. Inserting this hose is very tricky. You would definitely want to use the tapered end and attach it such that the pointed end is kind of in between the bend of the hook. Then you want to be careful to make sure that when you pull it through, you actually see both the end of the metal hook and the pointed end of fuel line. That way you know that it's going to come through all without tearing that fuel line and having to do it over again. Don't worry, there is plenty of fuel line here, so if you do have to do it over again, just cut another slanted end and try it again. Now you just want to carefully pull that return line to where there's only about a couple of inches left inside the fuel tank. It doesn't need to reach the bottom or anything. This is just for return fuel from the carburetor. Now for the supply line, you want to cut this because you're going to have to push it through the fuel tank. Sorry it goes off camera a little bit there, but I just push it down and then use the pliers to push it all the way into the fuel tank and then grab onto that fuel filter end and pull it out the fuel opening. Same thing here, we're going to run that fish line through the outlet of the fuel tank and attach it to the new fuel supply hose. Be careful, this clear hose was much thicker and harder to work with than the return hose, so it was a little more tricky to get this attached to the fish line and pull it all the way back out. While I'm trying to get that fished through there, I'll just go ahead and make a note that that small socket set and ratchet that's showing is totally not needed for this project. I did go ahead and loosen the carburetor a little bit so that when I sprayed carb cleaner back in there, it would clean some of the surfaces and get past the carburetor into the cylinder a little bit. Totally unnecessary for this repair, but if you're like me and get a little overkill on cleaning things, then now's a good time to go ahead and do that. Now the supply line, you want to pull through that hole until that filter is kind of resting in the bottom of the tank, because this does need to be submerged in fuel in order to work properly. So you want that filter to sit at the lowest part of the tank, and you can kind of see that from the camera angle there. Now we're going to attach the fuel tank back onto the engine. As you can see, that little spacer is what I mentioned earlier that I dropped, and so make sure those are there so that everything fits back together properly. Again, this is your T25 Torx bit in order to put these screws back on, and again, as I'm showing 2 screws here, it does look like there's a third hole, and so probably your weed eater has 3 screws. It's just this one was used when I got a hold of it, so probably already lost one. Now we're going to connect those fuel lines. The clear one is the supply line, which goes to the lower port on the carburetor, the one that's furthest from the primer bulb itself. As I attempt to install that fuel supply line, you can kind of tell I'm struggling with that. It doesn't really go on that port very well, and it turns out that you definitely want to use some kind of lubricant here. You don't want to use anything that could obstruct that passage because it is quite small. So nothing like soap or anything like that. I actually prefer to use what's called Super Lube. It's an all-purpose and food-safe lubricant, so I keep a couple of tubes of those around the house, one of them for the water softener area so that you can actually provide good lubrication for some of the seals there, and then another one for outdoor activities that I'm not worried about, eating or drinking from it. The clear supply line goes on the port below the carburetor, furthest from the primer bulb. That yellow return line goes to the port that's closest to the primer bulb, and just make sure to push them on all the way so that you don't have any of them pop off or leak. Now we throw that air intake and carburetor cover back on so that we can complete this assembly.
And now the moment of truth. Prime it 10 times. Got lots of fuel, that's good. Set to start.